Alright guys, well I don't have a document camera, but I do have a cell phone, this thing, and a guitar stand holding it up. So let's use this setup to go over one of the methods you have to write for the A assignment of the Mad Lib. And that method is a getStringFromUser method, or some type of method or a snippet of code that will allow your program to get some text from the person sitting at the keyboard. So if you recall, a method is just a bundle of code that does something. So let's make one of the first things that we do to draw that bundle of code. So here is my open curly brace, and there is my close curly brace, and all the code for this method will live in here. Now, I need to tell the computer that I'm writing a method, so I'm going to have to write a method header right here. Now, the first thing I'm going to write is a modifier, the first one being public, and that just tells the program that anybody can call this method. It can be used in this program or other programs. For the purpose of this class, everything is public, so that's easy to remember. And the second thing is going to be the return type of the method. And I don't really want to talk about that yet, so let's skip ahead a little bit. Actually, there's one other one that we had to always put in, static. And what static means is a bit beyond the scope of this class, but suffice to say, it allows this method to work in the context of a program with a main method. So we can write computer programs that don't actually do anything, they just kind of teach the computer how to do stuff. And typically they have non-static methods, but since our program has a main method, the thing we want the computer to actually do, we use that static. So these two things, public and static, are always present for all of our methods. You're always going to write those, just like that, first two things. The next would be the return type, all right? And then after that, we have the method name. So let's come up with a good name for this method. How about getString from user, because what we're doing is getting a string from the user. Excellent. Now, the way that we know it's a method, the way the computer knows it's a method, is by putting a set of parentheses after the method name. So these parentheses could be empty or there could be stuff in there. We'll again get to that in a little bit. But we still have this gap here of our return type. So this method is meant to get a string from the user, meaning that this method is going to run, and when it's done running, it's going to take a string and send it back to our program so we can use it. So the thing that this method returns, or its return type, is a string. All right, so we have a method, getStringFromUser, that returns a string. Now, we have to write the code that's actually going to do all this, and one thing that you should know about programming sooner rather than later is that you don't necessarily write top to bottom all the time. So you can imagine if you were writing an essay or a letter, you'd probably just start writing top to bottom. Think more along the lines of writing an outline for an essay, in which case you might skip to, say, the end and make your concluding remarks to kind of remind you about what you want to get to. Or you might just kind of put parts that you know are going to be in there. So since this method returns a string, I'm actually going to skip down to the bottom and write that line. Return, and let's call it, say, user text. So I'm going to say, let's return the text written by the user. So now I actually have a somewhat working method because I told the computer I'm going to return a string, and then I return it. Now, the only thing is the computer's going to look at this and say, wait, what is user text? That's not a thing. In which case we'll go, oh, okay. Now let me go to the top of my program, the very first line, and I'm going to say, make a new string variable called user text. So I'm making a variable, but I'm not giving it any value. And then at the end, I'm going to return it. Now, this in-between part, this is where we're going to actually teach the computer how to talk to the keyboard, which is important because otherwise this method really doesn't do its job. So let's focus on that, but again, let's just review where we're at. We wrote a method header that had modifiers in the front that we just always put in. We have a return type. All right, so this is our return type. And we got a method name. All right. And then in here, we left empty. And we're going to come back to that again. But this is a space for what we call parameters. And this red pen's running out of ink, so I'm going to trade to a different color. But I just like to keep it. Let's see, here's another red pen. Let's see if this works. So this is where our parameters go. This is our method name. This is our return type. And these are our modifiers. Okay, now you may hear some noise in the background, so give me 1 second. Un momento. I'm going to get my son who wants to join us. Come here, buddy. Come here. All right. Let's see. All right. This is Aidan. He's the one making noise. Say hi, Aidan. Hold on. He's going to join us now. Oh, is that a big smile? Give him a smile. Hello. All right. He's going to be a programmer too. He just doesn't know it yet. So we wrote our method out, and then we created a place to put a string, and at the end we're going to return that string, or really whatever value is there. So remember, when we make variables, we're saying I need a place to store a string, and let's call that place user text. So you can imagine, I'll kind of draw over here. What we really did is we made a box that can hold a word, and the name of the box is user text. So down here, when we say return user text, we're not really returning the name, we're returning whatever's in the box. And right now that box is empty. So let's write the code that's going to fill it in. We want to talk to the keyboard, and to do that we're going to use a tool called a scanner. So a scanner is another object, just like a string is an object. So we're going to make a scanner. Let's call it, how about SC? We'll just keep it short. And a scanner is kind of complicated, so in order to create it, we have to call this special method called a constructor. So we're going to say, let's give a value to SC. So now SC is a box too, all right? But it's going to actually point to this thing that we build, which right now is just kind of an amorphous blob. And we're going to say make a new scanner. All right, here is the what's called the constructor method. You can tell it's a method because it's got those parentheses again. So the scanner constructor builds a scanner, but in order to build a scanner, you need to tell it where to scan. We're going to say scan at system.in, otherwise known as the keyboard. All right, so this now says, this is some weird little, let's make it like a microscope. Ooh. There we go. All right, so we have this thing that scans the keyboard now. And SC is just telling us where that microscope is, or where that thing is that we can look at the keyboard. So now we want to actually see what the user's typing in. So the way that we're going to do that is by talking to the scanner, which has the name SC. Just like if I were talking to any one of you guys, I might call your name, but your name isn't you. You are a person. You're really complicated. Your name is just something that I kind of associate with you, because it's harder to say, you know, that guy with the blonde hair and about 6 foot tall and weighs about this and does this and likes these things. It's very complicated. So instead we just say Ben. That's a lot easier. All right, so let's talk to SC. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give myself a gap here since I'm on paper. I'm going to say SC dot. All right, this dot is called a dereferencer. So what that means is it says this box doesn't actually contain the scanner, it just tells you where the scanner is. So the dot says, hey, I don't care about the memory location, I care about the actual scanner. I'm talking to it. So SC dot, go get me the next line. And I apologize, since it's on paper, I'm not sure if it's a capital L or a lowercase l. So when you're typing, just check. And next line is a method that collects the next line of text, meaning everything that's typed up to an enter key from the keyboard. sc.nextLine. And what I want to do with that? Well, I want to store it. That's the user text, right? So really what I'm going to do is say user text equals whatever that next line is. Perfect. Now, earlier I said we're going to come back to this parameter section. Now's when we're going to do it, because I have a little bit of an issue with this. And the issue is this, is that we call this method getStringFromUser. It makes a variable. place to hold the text. Then it makes a scanner and it listens to the keyboard. And then the next thing I type gets collected. But there's no time that we actually talk to the person at the keyboard. So the person at the keyboard is unaware of our code. They don't know inherently that the program is waiting for us to type something in. So what's good practice in a method like this, because this method is talking to the keyboard, would be to prompt the user at the keyboard. So let's go right before this place where we actually take in the line, and let's write system dot out, in this case the monitor, dot print line, and let's send a message to the person at the keyboard. Something like type in your name, or type in a verb, or type in a noun, or type whatever. Now here's the problem. There's nothing that you can write here that is going to always work when you ask the user to type something in. So for instance, if you said type in your name, well then this method doesn't really get a string from user, it gets a name from user. If you said type in a noun, then it's only really getting a noun from user. So instead of writing an actual message in quotes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say message, and that is a variable name. It's whatever message I want this method to print. Now what I'm going to do is go back up to where we talked about this parameter before, and I'll say, hey, in order to get a string from the user, what you really need to do is take in a string called message. And that means that when I call getStringFromUser, I might say getStringFromUser, enter a name. In which case, enter a name will get printed, and then hopefully the person types in their name and that gets returned. So let's flip this over and see it in action. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that I'm in the main method, and I'm not going to bother writing all this stuff up here, but we're in the main method. And let's say I had this point where I wanted to print something out, system.out.println, your name is username. Alright, so this is kind of like your Mad Lib, where I'm taking a sentence and filling it in with a variable. But in order to do that, I'd have to go up here and say something like string username. Now right now, I'm going to still have an error because I declared that username is a string, and you can print strings, but it never gets a value. So if you remember our picture before, I have username, which is a box, and there's nothing in the box yet, it's just empty. So let's give it an actual value. And we can do that by calling the method we just wrote. Username is equals, give it the value, that get string from user returns. Now this method, remember, has a parameter. We have to put a message in there in order for it to work. So let's say something like type your name. That is a message that would make sense in that context. So now when we run our program, declare a string, a place where a string could be, call this method, getStringFromUser, just print the message, type your name, and this is going to return, it's going to send back a string that gets stored here. So what's going to happen is this method is actually going to create some string like Kevin, and it's going to return the memory location. So username equals, it's going to end up getting an arrow to that name that this method got for me. And then when it says system.out.println your name is, it's going to print your name is Kevin. Shazam. So that's in use, and that's how we create it. I hope this video helped, and I'll try to get better ways to record it in the future. But before I go, I want to say bye.